Hello everyone, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Giacomo Talignani. I'm a journalist at Repubblica and focusing primarily on climate and environment. And over the last 4 years, more or less, I've covered and reported on the COPs. And the last years I was in Baku at COP29, when the issue of loss and damage was discussed. And I will go in Brazil at COP30, where we'll know there will be a presentation of a new report on the new updates of the loss and damage. So I'm pleased that we'll be discussing this topic today. And the title of today's meeting is Insuring the Future Climate Insurance Reparation and the Financial Gap Between COP29 Commitments and Loss and Damage Needs. And in this webinar, we'll try to finish in about 1 hour, more or less. So maybe at the end, we have space for some questions from the discussant or from the students. And I'd like to begin by giving the floor to Professor Francesco Grillo, Vision Director, for a brief introduction. Francesco, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Giacomo. This is not just one webinar, it is the last webinar. It has been quite a work. It's the last but not least on loss and damage. And so thank you very much to Gianfranco and all of you students. Loss and damage will be one of the key point, and as we say in Italy, strong dish, piatto forte of the entire conference. This is because we will have on our ideas, on the ideas that you produce to overcome the gridlock on loss and damage. We will have a strong link with COP30 and with SEBRI, that you know, the Brazilian think tank on energy and climate change. But we will also have in Venice, Ibrahima Jong and Antonella Baldini, she's Italian. Ibrahima is the executive director of the UN board, which is sort of working at the architecture of loss and damage. And Antonella Baldino is a representative for, I think, Europe. She will tell us better when she will be in Venice. So they are the policymaker on this very thing. So we also produced as Vision last year a paper on loss and damage. I hope you sort of consider our input. But I would leave the floor to you students, to your PPT, whatever you have to.
Okay. Thank you.
Grazie,
Thank you so much, Francesco. Thank you so much. I will share the PowerPoint file, but the first discussant, the first presenter will be Mark Felix. Give me just a moment to share the slides. Here we are. Can you see the file?
Yes.
Wonderful. So, thank you as all for having us here today. And Mark, please, the stage is yours.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you again from all of us that you're here. We really appreciate your time and the input you're going to give us. Maybe a small thing in like our personal capacity. We're all PhD candidates rather than students. Okay, but as for the actual paper, so we deal with the loss and damage mechanisms of climate change and climate change damages, and we're interested in bringing together the reality of it, together with the efficiency and some form of justice criteria. Which means that if we go one slide further, we begin by looking at the baseline, like where are we at? And we try to augment that with considerations of the theoretical problems that are connected to loss and damages and climate justice principles. So where we are currently at after the Baku conference, the COP29, is that the fund for responding to loss and damage has now been fully operationalized. It was originally planned at the COP27, but now it was actually announced to be fully functional. Financing can be collected, it can be managed, it can be disbursed. So that's the good news. The bad news about this fund is that it's heavily underfunded. So we assume that we need roughly 400 billion annually in order to cover the losses and damages that are being created, a number that is meant to rise over the years. We are currently at pledges covering roughly 730 million. So the gap is very, very large between what we want to have and what we actually do have. This is the first element on loss and damages that was decided at the COP29 or announced. The second element is that the COP29 decided on a new collective quantified goal on the climate finance, which is of 300 billion a year by 2035, which again, like this goal is partly meant to, is meant to cover the loss and damage fund and additional elements, and we are already expecting to need 400 billion for the loss and damage, so we're slightly underfunded. But in addition to this goal, there is a call on all actors, which includes public and private actors, to mobilize $1.3 trillion per year by 2035, a number that would actually get us somewhere, but we're very, very far away from this goal. And crucially, a problem with this is that there's no explicit enforcement language in it, and losses and damages are only implicitly included. So this is our reality baseline. The losses and damages additionally have a certain amount of theoretical issues attached to them, where we will discuss four. So there's the agent issue, there's the form issue, the size issue, and then the mechanism issue. In the first instance, the agent issue essentially covers the question of who should be paying for these losses and damages. And there are two major opinions. One is that only states should pay, primarily historical and current huge emitters. And then there's the opinion that it should be a mixed stream of finance consisting of public grants and of private investments. And both of those have some arguments in favor. So the view that only states should pay, one has a justice consideration. So these are the groups that historically have contributed to climate change by creating emissions. And secondly, we're generally unconvinced that capitalist processes will actually be able to provide the stability and the fairness, or like that they will provide funds in a stable and fair manner to the most vulnerable targets. So which brings us to the mainstream, where that they allow us to mobilize private funds in addition to the public funds, which allows us to then save some of the public funds for other purposes. And the second point is that it might be more feasible than public funds because we see a huge amount of inaction, large gaps in financing, and public opinion on providing these funds is also not particularly favorable, which might make an extreme more feasible. The second issue that's connected to losses and damages is once we know who should pay, the question is like, how do we implement this money? And that's also partly dependent on our answer to agents. So if we think that we should only use money from public funds, then we need some form of grants and national pledges. If on the other hand, we think about a mixed stream view, then we want maybe some form of insurances, bonds, and business investments to mobilize the funds. And these are the more contentious issues. Then we have the size issue, which is more or less acknowledged. The COP29 has acknowledged that we should aim for 1.3 trillion per year. The problem with this is, while it is acknowledged, it's very unlikely that we will actually be reaching this in the immediate future. If you remember the gap between current funding and the funding that we're aiming for. And so we might need some form of intermediate steps to achieve this goal. And then lastly, if we combine all of these points, there are questions about the exact mechanism that the losses and damages should provide in order to be implemented. Because if we look at public grants, then what we want is some form of enforcement structure that creates binding rules for the states. That actually means that we get the money and that we can actually enforce these pledges to be activated. While on the other hand, if we have private investments, then what we want is we can't force them, so we need to incentivize them in some way and to implement some form of economic incentives. In our proposal now, we combine this baseline of reality where we currently stand with these theoretical problems, and we are suggesting some form of multi-level mode of climate finance that ultimately aims to combine feasibility, the reality of a general unwillingness to act, with climate and distributive justice concerns. And so what we suggest is a mixed stream version where we use public grants that would need to be binding and indexed to both responsibility and capacity. National pledges, which would be additional money in addition to these public grants, which would once given also become binding, but need to cover a minimum amount so that they're not simply greenwashing. But then also that we have some form of private investments that we need to incentivize and where these elements then come with 4 implementation tools. We need the enforcement mechanisms that we talked about. We need some form of scaling up strategies in order to achieve the amount of money that we're aiming for. And we need the market incentives. And ultimately, these are all financial elements connected to losses and damage. But if we aim to have some form of just mechanisms in place and actually solve loss and damage problems, then we also need to think about how these are implemented and the socio-political elements of it. And this we cover in the form of the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. And Alessandro will talk us through these financial mechanisms now.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark, so much. Yeah, in the next minutes, I will try to describe in more details the 3 main financial mechanisms that represent the core of our proposal. So we can just begin with the first layer, which is binding public grants. We decided not to rely on conventional criteria that already provide list of countries, but we decided to use 2 novel criteria because we tried to ensure that both historical responsibility and current responsibility were considered. So which are the state included in this first mechanism? We have a first criteria according to which are liable for grants all the states that have contributed 4% or more of all cumulative historical emissions. And this group includes US, EU, Russia, Japan, and UK. And we introduced a second criteria. And here the idea is that are liable for the grants all the states that currently produce 5% or more of the surplus of global emissions beyond the baseline of the 1990 level of emission. This is in order to capture 2 major contemporary emitters, which are China and India. And the next question is how this mechanism can be implemented. And as Mark has mentioned before, estimates suggest that by 2030, at least $400 billion will be required to address loss and damage cost. And given that the new collective quantified goal aims to mobilize $1.3 trillion, we argue that at least 30 to 40% of the of this fund should go directly to loss and damage. And also there is a problem of allocation. How much should each country contribute to these public grants? And we basically, to assess and fairly distribute the responsibility, we developed a kind of composite matrix combining 4 dimensions with different weights. The first parameter is cumulative historical emission share, and it is weighted at 1.5 to acknowledge the pivotal importance of historical responsibility. GDP is weighted 1 to reflect the absolute financial capacity of country, and this reflects a kind of ability to pay principle. Then we have the current global emission share, and this is included with a weight of 0.5 to create a forward-looking incentive for rapid decarbonization. Furthermore, actually, current emission have a big impact now and in the future, maybe more than in the last decades. And so we decided to include current emission as an additional parameter, even though they are actually in quantitative terms included in the cumulative emission share. And then we have GDP per capita, which is weighted at 0.5 and serve as essentially as an adjustment for domestic equity to reflect the economic well-being of a country population. The weights were chosen basically to reflect key principle of climate justice. They are not strictly technical indexes, but I will come back on this methodological point in a moment. Basically, in the slides, you can see the formula we use to derive each country contribution to the grants. And the country index, as you can see, is calculated by summing the data for the 4 parameters of each country, with each parameter weighted according to the values we choose. After that, we normalize these scores across all countries to calculate what percentage of the total fund each should contribute. And here in the next slide, you can see the data we used. We draw all the data from our wording data, and all the links are in the draft paper we send you. And you can see also the outcomes for each country according to our calculations. Now, before closing this part, let me briefly address two potential criticism of the calculation model we've proposed, we presented. First, some might argue why we choose this particular number and not others. And this is actually a problem that we thought about. The fact is that the weights we have chosen aren't derived from strictly empirical calibration, but they actually serve a normative and proportional function. That is, they are designed to reflect the core principles of climate justice, particularly polluters pay principle and ability to pay principle, in a way that is balanced and forward-looking. So our aim was not actually to offer precisely mathematical accuracy, but the model's aim was to offer a structured way to express widely shared ethical intuition. In other words, the goal is not to deliver perfect numbers, and we can debate, but to capture responsibility in a principled, morally coherent way. And second, you might wonder if there is a problem of double counting of current emission, as I was mentioning before, since the emission of 2023 could be argued that are already included in the historical emission share since 1750. We believe that although historical emissions are important, they should not override current emission share, and this is for 2 main reasons. First, current emissions have a much greater impact now than they did decades ago, because we are getting dangerously close to tipping points in the Earth climate system. So today's emissions do more damage than those of the past. Second, including current emission create an incentive effect. It encourages today's major emitters to decarbonize more quickly because their contribution is linked not only on their past action, but also on what they are doing right now. So yes, the model maybe is not perfect. We don't claim it is, of course, but we believe that it's transparent, it's ethically grounded, it's adaptable, and offer a practical way to guide fair and responsible climate financing. I'll turn to the second layer, which is threshold national pledges. National threshold pledges are a voluntary mechanism designed to scale up the financing and reinforce principle of distributive justice, according to which country can contribute. Some country can make further pledges than the contribution that we have identified in the previous mechanism. And here the criteria for eligibility change. We decided that in addition to the countries already identified in the banding grants layer, all parties listed in Annex 2 of the UNFCCC may choose to make further pledges. The crucial element is the constraint on the minimum pledge. Any pledge made cannot be smaller than the smallest binding public grant. In our running example, the minimum is $4.8 billion, which is India's calculated obligation. And these constraints serve a dual purpose. First, widening the contributor base, because it allows high-income countries such as Australia, Canada, Switzerland, which may have been excluded from the strict binding criteria above, to contribute, ensuring that only those that have and other entities that have the financial capacity to participate to the fund can actually participate. And the second purpose is preventing greenwashing, because by setting a minimum based on a weighted adjusted index, the mechanism prevents minimal or merely symbolic contribution from wealthy nations. Moreover, we believe that most high-income countries listed in the Annex 2 could not reasonably object to this threshold from a fairness perspective, since it is based on the lowest indexed contribution under the binding scheme, a contribution assigned to a country significantly less wealthy than most Annex 2 members. So we believe that the worry or the argument from fairness is satisfied by this mechanism. And now we can turn to the last financial mechanism that we have tried to articulate. And the last layer of our proposal is based on an attempt of scaling up private investment. Because we know public finance won't be enough, basically. We must de-risk and incentivize private capital to flow where it's needed most, so vulnerable and high-risk regions. So we try to articulate three main ideas. First, we must grant substantial tax credits to companies that invest in the most risky and vulnerable areas. In the previous webinar, we talked a little bit about the Green Bridge facility in Brazil, which support investors tackling deforestation. And we believe that the Green Bridge facility, which will be a topic in COP30, operates in line with this objective, since it provides a set of services designed precisely to offer technical support to private who wants to invest in vulnerable regions, to make those investments more financially stable and feasible from the point of view of implementation. And second, a global mixed private-public insurance scheme. Although these may be perceived as very ambitious, we believe that will be pivotal that a portion of the funding from the binding public grants and national pledges must be used to establish a mixed insurance scheme. The regions where climate insurance is most needed are often the same ones where insurance costs are highest and unaffordable for local communities. This creates a problem of uninsurability, and we believe that it could be addressed through mixed public-private insurance schemes. And finally, climate bond systems. Again, this may be perceived too ambitious, but we believe that climate bonds are crucial for scaling up private investment. For this reason, we propose that a portion of the funding from the binding public grants and from the national threshold pledges must be used to create the financial foundation for securitizing the issuance of bonds. In the last webinar, we mentioned the Tropical Forest Forever facility, and we know that this will be another topic presented and discussed at COP30. And again, we believe that it exemplifies perfectly this blended financial model. Initial capital from sponsor, and in this case could be public sponsor through the two mechanisms we have just described, act as a long-term guarantee, which allow the issuance of bonds to private investors, raising the necessary capital. And in the case of the Tropical Forest Forever facility, the goal is the protection and conservation of forests and local communities in the tropical areas. But we believe that the grounding mechanism might be implemented also for other dimensions of climate finance. And for the last part, which deal with indigenous peoples, I give the stage again to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. My internet connection seems to be slightly unstable, so I will keep my video off. But essentially, in addition to these financial mechanisms that Alessandro just discussed, we also want to stress that in order for these loss damages to actually be functional and to fulfill the role that we wanted to fulfill, which is to actually cover the losses and damages that groups experience as a result of climate change, and for the mechanism to work in a just manner, we also need to make sure that there are some social criteria involved in addition to the mere financial ones. And here we focus particularly on indigenous peoples and local communities, because they are among the most vulnerable groups to climate change, and so those most in need of these losses and damages. And here we propose 3 elements. The first is to give them more representation, particularly indigenous peoples, to give them a permanent form of representation within key bodies that actually holds decision-making power. So they're not merely observers, but can actively contribute and exert their agency in these decisions. That could be a loss and damage fund, the Warsaw mechanism, but also to include them in workstream synergies. So there are already bodies for indigenous peoples and local communities to connect them very directly with the loss and damage fund and allow them to contribute to decisions that are being made there. In the second step, a lot of the damage experiencing aren't actually financial or economic in the way that a lot of our, but rather they might be. Hello? No.
I can. Maybe Mark is not here.
No.
Yeah, I think there's like a problem.
Yeah, I think there is problem with Mark's connection. So Alessandro, possibly you can go on, and then we'll try to recover Mark. Alessandro, can you hear me?
Of course. Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you. Yeah. Basically, the final part of the of our presentation deal with the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, and we believe that this was an important part to include in the design of an L&D mechanism, since, as Mark mentioned before, local communities and indigenous people are among the most vulnerable communities to the effects of climate change, and the most heated by the consequences of climate change. So we designed basically three main proposals, plus a consideration that we have to take in mind while thinking about indigenous peoples and local communities, and a thing that is very often forgotten by the debate on the topic, and is that indigenous people are not one homogeneous community. Actually, the communities in Northern America are very different from community in Australia, which are very different from indigenous people in Africa or in Asia. So it's actually, and also the social movement is really fragmented, is very diverse, and so it's very difficult to try to implement a general or universal prescription or commitments or recommendation. But since we believe that the inclusion of indigenous people was an important topic of loss and damage, we thought that it was worth the attempt. And basically, we try to develop 3 main options, 3 main kind of proposal. The first is a permanent representation with decision-making power in key bodies of the UNFCCC. For example, the Varsavia mechanism, or the Green Climate Fund, or the fund for responding to loss and damage, or at least a work stream synergies between the platform for local communities and indigenous people and these bodies. Because until today, the platform of indigenous people has actually played only a consultative role with no decision power, and also the UNFCCC structure is the UNFCCC body are structured in a way that is in contrast with the clear and direct communication, and also with the power of veto, or more direct this decision-making power. So this is the first idea. The second idea is that since damages and, most importantly, non-economic losses are deeply entrenched in the cultural framework and on the values of local communities, we strongly believe that the capacity of developing framework to assess non-economic losses should be a possibility, and not a possibility, actually, a right that must be granted and recognized to indigenous people, since I believe that foreign entities or a foreign subject has actually no capacity or authority to establish the quantity and the amount and the deal of the losses in regions that are only very superficially known. And the third proposal deal with the fact that a lot of indigenous people and local communities actually don't have the capacity to be involved in the debate and in the decision making and in the diplomatic mechanism of the UNFCCC. So our aim was to try to remove the barriers, so provide financial, logistical, and also technical and linguistic support in order to make the engagement of this community, or at least of representative of this community, possible and feasible during the next COP and during the next event dealing with climate governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you. Really, really interesting work. And just for a short comment for Professor Gianfranco Pellegrino, the Rector AXA Luis Lab on Climate Change, Risk and Justice. Gianfranco, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wonder whether we could stop sharing so we can see each other. Alessandro, could you possibly stop the sharing? Okay, so let me say something about that in few seconds. This is the general rationale of the work, and I'm now realizing I'm in the dark. I don't want to be in the dark, so sorry. And I can also speak without being in the dark, and also trying to switch on my light. Okay, so the rationale of this is to have feasibility and also kind of realistic appreciation of what is happening. Loss and damages is politically difficult because, you know, Baku was half empty, half void glass. There was something, but it's not enough. We should start from there. But also there are very clear ethical principles. People having ability to pay should pay something. People having responsibility should pay in proportion, even though the proportion could be not direct with their responsibility. So this is what the students are trying to do, and this seems to me a feasible and realistic, but also, let's say, normatively concerned proposal. And let me say the last thing. It seems to me unavoidable to have layers of funding, so different instruments. We have grants, we have pledges, we have private and market funding. This seems to me unavoidable. So the very first slide in which the students say there are different arguments in favor or against a mixed stream or a public stream. Okay, that's true. There are those arguments, but politically, of course, we should have mixed layers of funding because this is the reality in which we live. Okay, that's it for my initial comments.
Thank you, Gianfranco. I would like to listen the opinion of Gustavo Eluan, Executive Advisor of CEBRI. Gustavo, you have the floor if you are here.
Thank you, Giacomo.
Gustavo?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to say thank you for all the students and also the Professor Gianfranco here. I think that was a very interesting paper to read. I read it. I was happy to read it, and then I took a few notes to share with all of you here. But first of all, let me just briefly introduce myself. I'm Gustavo. I'm working at CEBRI, the Brazilian Center of International Relations. in the climate transition and sustainability program here at SEBRI. Okay, so as I was saying, I took a few notes about the paper, just to be clear about what I'm saying. Well, first of all, I think it was a very clear and straightforward mechanism that you were or it was showing us. See, actually, Mark and also Alessandro, they show us incredible paper and also research about the loss and damage, showing all the 3 layers of funding, the index calculation that at principle, at the very beginning, it was not so easy to understand, but then I was reading the paper, it was very clear in your point. And I saw it also that you had like a, how can I say, a disclaimer, maybe, that you are aware of the matrix, have chosen, maybe can be criticized, but at least you're showing the ethical and it's open to debate, right? So I like it very much. So basically the whole paper was very clear and straightforward, showing also the implementation tools and etc. As also as the Professor Gianfranco was saying right now, about who should pay and etc., and about the combining private funds and also public funds. It was very interesting to understand the inclusive of justice and feasibility dimensions in your paper. So I like it also. It's kind of mosaic of solutions, right? Where you have to mix all of them to tackle this problem of loss and damage. In the paper, I would say that you remind about the loss and damage response fund, LDRF, you mentioned, that's brilliant. And also, I saw, because I was reading about the loss and damage situation itself, there are some countries that says about humanitarian aid funds, insurance, risk management mechanism that could be added to this paper, just to bring more information to the reader, right? As a Brazilian, I was particularly happy that you shared 2 examples, 2 initiatives, the GBF, the Green Bridge Facility, and the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever Facility. I was very happy to see this. And one of my last comments will be, I was looking at the COP30 presidents, the letters that they released, and I found in the third letter that they share with the whole people, they were saying about the loss and damage. And that letter was released in May, by the way, if you want to find out. And then in this letter, the presidents of COP30 was saying about strengthening the institutionalization and connection among the 3 dimensions of loss and damage under the UNFCCC, which is that maybe this can be help even to your paper, just to mention it, because they mentioned this connection between the Warsaw International Mechanism that you wrote about it, the Santiago Network for Loss and Damage, SNLD, and the Loss and Damage Fund that you mentioned. So I think there was maybe to be more feasible to, once there is this whole mechanisms, and it was mentioned by the COP30 presidents, maybe you can also add this other existing institution to your paper. And for last but not least, my last comment, I was thinking about this kind of liability and compensation and the whole under the loss and damage umbrella. Mark, I think we were saying that this this whole subject started at COP27 in Egypt, and also in COP28 in Dubai. Probably the developed countries, they are also concerned about this because potentially they are trying to not be responsible only themselves for the compensation claims. I mean, maybe they are worried about legal liability, legal responsibility, potentially triggering lawsuits against them. So maybe if you say about the compensation, they will not receive quite well about the loss and damage funding because of this kind of triggering lawsuits thoughts. And instead of this, maybe you can base it in comparison and facilitation and do not involve liability or compensation. Maybe it would be more acceptable. Only just adding a paragraph about geopolitical feasibility, you would make the whole recommendation more realistic and feasible. So I think that's it. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo.
Giacomo, may I jump on this, because that's very precious what Gustavo said, and especially the last point. The last point is crucial, and we would like to add many remarks about the idea that we are not proposing a liability and compensation mechanism, and we are not using responsibility in terms of liability. Still, it seems to me that the students never used. So are you referring to a sentence in particular? Because when I discussed a bit with the students after they prepared a draft, that was exactly the idea. Responsibility we're using is in terms of contribution in terms of emissions. Okay, you are emitting, there is a bit of historical emissions. Of course, we cannot say that historical emissions are nothing, but this is discounted, and then there are current emissions, and then there are global emissions, and no one is speaking about legal liability, even though we're speaking about grants, which are binding in a sense. But, you know, it's much more distributive justice duties than, let's say, legal climate litigation. But I would like to know from you if in the paper form, in the text, there is any hints to that, because I agree with you that we should drop this.
Exactly. Thank you. Sure. Thank you, Gianfranco. So I was saying, once you develop it is an index where you add Japan, United States, Europe, UK at the top, like emissions and also GDP. I was thinking of, okay, that might be quite close to responsibility. And frankly, I agree with you when you were saying about corporation, and also this is more acceptable for them, right? So by checking and taking a look of the text and the index itself, which there are many developed countries in it, maybe just adding a paragraph saying about the responsibility, actually the cooperation, and then explaining about why they are there, as you did, just to keep like very clear that is the cooperation sense that is being discussed. And of course, as you mentioned, there is the kind of the historic. It's not. It's in the mission start. The starting mission. It's a thing, but it's quite clear. But I think it's just adding a paragraph regarding the liability, responsibility, and cooperation would like add to the text itself. Right after the index.
Thank you very
much. Thank you, Gustavo. I don't know if Thais is here. Maybe Thais Batista, project manager, climate and
I think Thais will not. Giacomo, I think Thais will not. Unfortunately, she's in another meeting. She cannot join us.
Okay, no problem. So we can start to listen the opinion of Dario Mangili, Head of Sustainability at the Impact SGR. So Dario, you have the floor if you want.
Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for also the presentation on the paper. I think it was like quite a thorough framework that you have been presenting. I would like, as I'm the in my capacity as a head of sustainability for Impact SGR, and we are an investment manager focused on listed impact investing strategies. I would like to add to the view on how private investments could contribute to the loss and damage fund by bringing also a very pragmatic and, if possible, operational perspective. I think that like the key point that I think it's worth highlighting is that the huge gap that there is right now between the pledged capital and the expected financing needs that would require capital deployments in the order of 400 billions per year, when actually there is like just 700 millions being pledged right now. So I think that one possible area of further investigation for the paper could be towards like what could be main like effective market mechanisms to try to close or at least reduce the financing gap. Also because considering also the political headwinds we are right now at the global level, it's increasingly hard to believe that the states will be able to commit the capital to the extent that is required to meet the financing needs that were like outlined. Specifically, also the 1.5 trillion by 2035 of annual investments is totally unfeasible unless we find market-based mechanisms for involving global investors. And in my opinion, there are two possible directions where we could look at in order to develop market mechanisms and involve them. The first one is first loss. So using public funding to design investment strategies where the public money is used to absorb first losses on high-risk projects. And the second area instead will be insurance, climate insurance. I think that like public money could play the role of insurer of last resort. We are currently, I think that we are heading very fast into a scenario where it's going to be clear that we have enormously underestimated physical risks, at least like financial investors have been underestimating them extremely hard. And so, for example, like only the high sensitivity climate scenarios are the ones consistent with satellite observations since 2001, and which means that right now we are heading quite fast towards like at least plus 3 degree scenario by end of century, and it's very difficult to imagine like an abrupt reversal of this trajectory, even if we increased the we doubled the mitigation investments as we are supposed to do. So in this sense, the risk of uninsurability is on the rise also across developed markets, and having conditional insurance and conditional lending, with a conditional being related to specific adaptation resilience measures that could reduce the company level exposure to physical risks that will not be able to be insured anymore, are two areas where private capital could play a role if there is like the willingness to design market-based mechanisms, because by doing so, by using public money to de-risk this kind of capital deployment, could play quite a significant role in trying to reduce to a certain extent the finding gap that is enormous right now, and considering also the push towards like nationalistic instances across like the developed world right now, it's going to be increasingly difficult to have like developed countries committing more capital, which is close to zero right now, in spite of all the commitments that have been discussed so far. So I think that one potential area of like the increasing like of further research in the framework that you proposed, that I think that was very interesting, could be what technically and operationally could be market-based mechanisms for trying to close the financing gap between what is required and what it has been pledged so far for loss and damage.
Thank you, Dario. Thank you. I don't know, Gabriele, if Oliver is here. Gabriele, can you listen me?
Yeah.
No.
Oliver
So
will not join today. Yeah.
So maybe the Dario moment was the last one. So maybe Francesco won't say something for.
Sorry. Before Francesco saying something,
sure.
sorry, Francesco, may I ask Dario something more about that? So, Dario, thank you very much for that, because we the students thought a lot about that, and we are also, and I'm also thinking. So, while it's clear the second suggestion you gave, let's say insurer of last resort, and we mentioned this when in the label public-private insurance, which is in the PPT and in the paper, we thought about that, but we could be clearer about that. I have less clarity. Sorry, I'm not a business person, about the idea of covering losses. Could you possibly spell out better this idea? So imagine that what I have in mind and what we were thinking is, imagine there is a break-even period for any new business in a let's say renewable energies and so on and so forth. Are you proposing that public funding could cover some losses in the break-even period? Something like that?
Yes, like I was referring to two possible mechanisms. The first one is first loss regarding as a way to reduce the level of risk that private capital would get exposure to by financing any kind of loss and damage related needs. For example, like if you need to deploy capital for specific adaptation resilience investments in developing countries, that those kind of investments would be considered as extremely high risk, also because they may be denominated in a local currency. So from like a European investor perspective or US American investor perspective, like those kind of investments would require huge returns in order to justify the risk. So having like public capital, public spending being employed in order to reduce to a certain degree the risk level that private capital will need to bear, that could be possibly an effective mechanism for attracting private capital at an effective rate, because like you would assure that private capital receives a return that is by market adjusted, because you'll have like public money absorbing like part of the risk in the critical phase of key loss and damage projects or adaptation resilience projects, for example. The second element I was referring to is about like conditional lending, in the sense that like you referred to like conditionalities not being too harsh, which is absolutely key, but you could also try to look at conditionalities from a positive impact angle, which is like if you receive money for loss and damage, you could link the deployment of those kind of capital to the implementation of adaptation resilience measures that could reduce then the overall risk of a given community or a high risk a climate physical risk high area. So by linking the deployment of like lending capital to also specific adaptation resilience measures that would contribute to reduce the exposure to physical risks. You could like hit two pigeons with one stone, and that would help local communities increasing their resilience vis-a-vis the increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events and the consequential impacts that derive from them. I think was it clear now what I referred to?
Very clear, very clear. Thank you very much, Dario.
Yeah.
Clear and crucial, and we will add this. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Dario. Gianfranco, Gustavo, do you have more questions for Dario, or maybe for the students? I don't know. No.
What
Okay.
about
Francesco?
No, I can even skip what I was going to say, whether if Viola or even Bianca, Nicoletta, or Simona wants to say something, because again, for tonight, for some reason, we were all men. So should you have anything to add, especially Viola?
Hi, thank you.
Maybe Viola is not here.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, actually, I don't have much to say. I would say my main contribution was to the part of the inclusivity to local community and indigenous people. So I could only stress that part maybe a bit more for a dimension of climate justice and responsibility, and also stress that maybe when we're talking about local communities and indigenous people, the loss and damage dimension, again, it shouldn't be only on the financial side, but probably also related to some, I know this is a bit more on the side of what we're talking about, but it's important to not distress this part entirely and see how there is an important part of self-determination of indigenous people, and the possibility to, as I was saying, to see this not just as an economic issue, but also as the right to manage their own land and to manage the territory, especially in the choice of adaptation and adaptation strategies, to also avoid reproducing forms of full dependency on other states. I don't know if this is very clear, and I know, again, it's not the main issue here, but yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Viola. Francesco?
Okay,
are you here?
Thank you, Giacomo. No, thanks, Viola. No, two things that I would. Well, first of all, it's a great work, great frame. So compliments to you all and to Gianfranco. Now, two things that I would probably underline. Gustavo and Dario sort of mentioned them. I would try to almost go past the logic of liabilities and compensation, and also try to go past the idea that the world can be divided neatly between good people and bad people, polluters and people who are damaged by pollution. It is very true that we are not even. No, there is a difference between Russia today and poor Jamaica. They just risk to be on the damage side, but I would try to go past the zero-sum game, you know, which also means that probably even it will be hard politically to make this approach to be accepted. But for instance, we ourselves try to propose something which is similar to what you are proposing, if I'm not wrong, such that everybody contributes to this facility according to her capacity, no? Her polluting history and capacity, economic capacity. And everybody is sort of insurable again, not protected according to her needs. So I would not exclude Cervia, no, in Italy, or Florida to be part of the equation, no. And I would not lose myself into complicated calculation for deciding what do we mean by developing countries and developed countries, because then we have a problem with China, for instance. So where is China? No, it's a not problem. So that's the first thing in terms of method that I think we should stress. And the second thing is about what you said, Dario, the insurance. And by the way, the founding partner of the conference is AXA, it's in insurance. But now, leaving alone that they are in insurance, I think that we not only have a financing gap, as you said, Dario, we have also a skill gap. You know, who should be the one to manage the facility called the loss and damage? Loss and damage is about risk management, and you know, probably insurance are still the ones that are better to do that kind of job, which is different, by the way, from just banking, you know, like the World Bank. So this is also one of the reasons why I think we should stress this idea that the public needs the private, in this case, the insurance, because they have skills to do risk management.
Totally agree.
And by the way, yes, Gianfranco, I would also like to hear from you on that point of method.
Because that's interesting, really interesting and crucial. So if we have some more minutes, let me say something about that. Okay, second point is clear, and we should put the second point, and it's very interesting and clever to say that there is a kind of skill contribution that some private actors can give. When you say implementation or management, those are different things. One thing is to say implementation. So the idea is that private sector can give kind of theoretical or technical contribution to the implementation, which is plausible. And well, I regret not having suggested to the students to say that, because that's obviously management is a political issue. So, and there is a body already established, which is a political body. So it seems to me harsh and risky to say that private actors should manage. So I would use should contribute to implementation, but that's easy and we are understanding. The first point is less easy to me because, you know, on one hand, I agree with the idea that it's very difficult. It's politically unwise and also very difficult to distinguish between developing and developed countries and the bad guys and the good guys on one hand. On the other hand, it seems to me that we are simply fooling ourselves if we say, okay, there is a country who is not polluting at all and who is damaged, but we ask this country a bit of money and then give money back. Well, that's fool. Of course, there are countries that are not polluting at all and they are simply being damaged. So there is a zero level. One of the way we could do this is, okay, having, mathematically kind of continuous index. So each country, according to its own contribution to emissions and GDP, some countries are producing zero and they are having a very minimal GDP, so they are giving zero. And we can have a long list of countries in which you don't have the bad guys. That's kind of presentation issue. And I'm very glad to do this, a long list of countries in which we have, but of course, that's simply cosmetic because there will be the country, Namibia, there will contribute zero. And of course, the poor guy in Serbia should receive compensation for the, but this is simply something that we could stress and we should, but this is simply, okay, trivial. We are speaking about countries because the political entities in the COP are countries, and then each country decided for the citizens. It's not a cosmopolitan thing in which we have individuals, we have countries. Of course, we should say that. So if your advice, which is a precious advice, is okay, have a continuous list, not discrete, in which we have the zero contribution country giving zero, and 0.00001 contribution country giving 0.1. Well, we could do this. We have an Excel file. It's very easy to do. Okay, but still, Russia will remain Russia, and China will remain China, and UK will remain UK.
Yeah.
So we can abolish thresholds on the presentation level, but then we have thresholds on the reality level.
No, of course, but there is also a difference between Italy and Spain,
Yeah, of course.
We are not all bad in the same way.
Yeah, but it's
you're right.
difference.
It is continuous, It is continuous.
Yeah, it's continuous. Okay, so we made discrete. Of course, that's we are friends here, and we are all on the same side. That's a kind of ethical disagreement, because when you say there is a threshold, you are saying, okay, you bad, you good. And in reality is not, you are more bad than me, you more good. Okay. Also, we could depict reality. So got it. We will do this, but the substance of the thing is that there are the big emitters. And it seems to me that we should say that they are the big emitters, because otherwise it's simply fooling ourselves. And it seems to me wasting time. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot.
Gianfranco. Thank you, Gianfranco. Thank you, Francesco. If there are some more questions, we are here. We have more time, maybe minutes, no more. Or if you don't have, I don't know, maybe Gustavo wants to say something?
No, I just want to say again, I just want to say thank you, and Gianfranco, I agree what you're saying. There's no like the good guys and the bad guys, and I understand why you add the 10 countries which are the most emissioners, and also has the biggest GDP also. I understand, and quite frankly, I like the index you created, by the way. And it was just like to provoke, because I miss this kind of political issue and geopolitical, better saying, geopolitical issue, and maybe this can contribute and be more feasible. But of course, I agree with you 100% when you are saying you can add all the whole countries, but the big polluters will be still the big polluters. Absolutely.
Thank you, Gustavo.
Okay, but
So-
we will do this, and with that's very good. Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you, Gianfranco.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I think we are all set.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Giacomo.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Francesco. It was really, really interesting, and I'm curious to be in Brazil in next month for cover some good story. I hope good story about loss and damage. I don't know. We will see. And so, thank you for being here and for your attention. And I hope to see you soon in Venice for the Dolomite conference. And also, thanks to the students for this great work that was really, really important. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you so much. Gianfranco, if you can stay with the students because we have two things to clarify. Okay, thank you, Giacomo, Gustavo, Dario, and also the spectators, Bianca, Nicoletta, and Simona. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Nicoletta, you wanna stay with us? Well, you cannot say because you are a spectator. Okay, basically, Nicoletta is AXA. No, she went. Okay, Gianfranco, tell me.